Hello and welcome everyone to Aginext 2021. You are on day 2, the day we are talking about people and psychological safety. Yesterday we were talking about the vision of what post-agile means, what DevOps means. Tomorrow we're talking about how to take that to the next level of scaling, which cannot be done with today's focus, which is psychological safety and agile people. Interesting choice of words anyway, and we'll get into that instead of saying Agile HR, though that is the hashtag common. If you are joining us live, this is all part of an eccentric community-based post-agile age conference, Aginext, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you want to ask questions, tweet to hashtag Aginext, and of course, those that are joining from the conference, please bring your questions into the chat of Zoom, and I will bring them to our fabulous speakers who are Steph, Liza, Tanya, and Andrea, and are all amazing women in agile mindset and in the crazy business and world that we live and work in today. So I'm just going to go with where the Zoom bubbles land. So Andrea, if you want to start by introducing yourself just briefly so we can get a context of your agile mindset and working with people background.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you everyone for joining us, whether you are listening on YouTube or live here in Zoom. And I'm Andrea Darabos. I'm from Hungary. Originally, I work here in the UK, and I call myself a business agility coach. And I also have a vision, and I work on humanizing work, which I will be excited to discuss with you. What does it mean exactly? I believe in the importance of making work and workplaces more human.
Hey, Tanya, you're next on my boxes.
Hi, I'm Tanya Spencer. I suppose I'm a career HR person, but I came to Agile about 6 years ago, and I now specialize in Agile transformation, and I'm frequently referred to as an Agile HR enthusiast or evangelist.
Interesting choice. I love that everyone has their own titles. Liza, you're up, please.
Hello. Yeah. Hi there, everyone. I'm Liza Layne. I've worked in the data field for about 15 years, but I've worked in tech for 20 plus years. Currently, I am a person, I would say, that advocates for women to get into data and stay there. That's why I do like to talk about both aspects of advocacy and also talk about what I do in my day job. As a hiring manager, I've had to deal with HR in terms of looking for diverse candidates. So for me, it's really important to kind of have this conversation. Thank you.
And finally, and just by random, whatever Zoom decided to do, which may or may not be random, that's a whole other data topic. But Steph, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. I'm Steph South, Global HR Consultant at Hsbc. I've been in a blend of consultancy and business partnering roles for the last 20 years, making myself feel very old, in banking, commercial and technology sectors. And like Tanya, came to Agile about 6 or 7 years ago, when I was very fortunate to be involved in Agile HR transformations and could really see the potential of Agile coming out of IT and into other areas, especially the people function.
Okay, great. And for those that are just joining us live, I'm Jennifer. I am from the Aginext community, and we are at Aginext 2021 talking to Andrea, Tanya, Liza, and Steph about what is Agile HR and the Agile People future. And with that, it's a polemic word. I'm constantly reminding some of my more antiquated-minded clients to stop referring, especially if they work in outsourcing, to stop referring to human beings as resources. And like, I think it's bad press for them to do this. So with that in mind, I'll go around the opposite direction this time. Just what is the department called currently in your current or previous companies? And, you know, the HR department. And what do you think it should be called? Steph, do you want to start?
Well, as you might have gathered from my job title, it is called HR in my office. And
HR, or do they define what that means?
it's just HR in the data. I think I might be corrected. And I guess if I was to think about, because I don't think it's really important what we call ourselves, to be honest, it's more important what we do and how we behave and how we show up for our people. So if I was to think about the kind of HR that gets me excited, if I was designing the HR department of the future, I might call it people and culture.
Okay, Liza, what has it been called on teams you've been on, and what would you like it to be called?
Okay, so most of the organisations I've worked in, it's always been referred to HR. In the later kind of companies I've worked with, I've seen direction more move towards people and talent. So trying to focus on the aspects of understanding that you can't bundle everybody as a resource, because it is an old-fashioned term to use, very much so, which kind of ties up with the biases that people have, I would say.
Yeah, cogs the machine.
Exactly.
But Tanya, since you're from the most HR-ish, for lack of a better word, background, is that because they are fundamentally from finance resources?
So I hate the word resources, and I never use it. So I suppose it's called HR where I work now. And I think it's for lack of a better term. And I sometimes just appreciate they no longer call it personnel, because when I was on secondment to Switzerland, it was personnel. So, which is like the most old-fashioned statement you can come up with. But whenever I think about HR, I think of this quote from Fabiola Eiholzer, who's an Agilist out of New York. And she says, what if HR stood for humane and resourceful? So for me, that's what I keep in mind for HR.
That's super fun. Andrea, what about you at the companies you've worked at, including banking, very traditional industries?
Yes, I would like to just include the previous points of view and reinforce or resonate with what has been said. What resonated with me from Steph is, is to look at the action rather than the word, perhaps. So how do we show up and act every day might be more important than what we do within the job title or the title itself. But the best title I have heard for HR was actually not in banking. It was in a high growth startup. And they called the department or the role people success. So people success department. Why I love it, it's because it's about helping people succeed and be their best version of themselves. So for me, it's about our mission is to really bring the best out of human potential. And it's not just because it's profitable, but it's also because it's the right thing to do. So, yeah.
It's interesting because we do have two separate departments in most companies, or at least in the tech space, customer support and customer success. So it would make sense that there be, God forbid, employee support and employee success at most companies. So what is wrong with HR? I'll let you go first, Liza, if that's okay. What is wrong with the current state of human resources or people, etc. names?
I think the thing is that, what's resonated from everyone is that the term is still kind of set in that mindset of 10, 20 years ago of human resources. And it is to move away from that. And for an organisation to work, you need to realise that it's based on the people. I think it's definitely something that I've had conversations around understanding the issues that we face when we're trying to hire in individuals. And if you don't have that mindset that, in order for people to want to work for that organisation, you need to move away from identify them as a resource identify them as a person of value that you're going to help to grow. And I think until we kind of see more organisations move towards that, we're always going to have an issue of getting people in. And I think you tend to find a lot of the more well-known and tech companies and the startups tend to focus on having their departments not called HR. They have, like, you know, the people aspect, success and so forth. So I think there's a lot of scope to grow on that, whereas a lot of the enterprise and established organisations still have that bureaucracy in place.
I think that's true. A lot of it's in name only, whether it's pride washing or for Black Lives Matter. That's not what we actually need from any department in an organization. Is your profile picture for a month on social media. So we need to get past performative. For those that are just joining us live, this is Aginext 2021, and we are talking about Agile HR and Agile People. Please send your questions to hashtag Aginext, and to those that are joining us live at the conference, please put them in the Zoom chat. Andrea, I'm going to peg this one at you because you just did the Agile People book, I think it's believed to be called, or you were one of the many authors of that book. What is Agile HR? Very good plug. Excellent.
Well prepared.
You're in the virtual background. Very good. And so for you, what is Agile HR?
Agile HR is in the title of our book, the Agile People book. And there are multiple Agile People books for those of you interested in reading them. We wrote the Agile People Principles book last year, which I think links to our conversation. I think unless, and this happens also in IT Agile transformations, it's the same about when we look at employee experience. Unless we go deeper and think about really aligning our behaviors with the values we want to perceive. So it's not enough to change the name of the department and say, now we are a people success department, or now we are agile, and we start doing Kanban, visualize the workflows of HR, or we start doing retrospectives. Unless we go deeper and ask ourselves, what does good look like? What does great look like? What is our vision on the very deep human level? What places and experiences do we want to create? So really going into principles. An example here is trust. So is our mission to control people and prevent risk and compliance? Is it our only success? Or is it more in the agile space? It's about trusting that people are well-intentioned and unleashing their potential. So it's a leap of faith. But if we start having these conversations with not just with the HR department, but with the leaders of the organization, and ask ourselves, what does great look like? Then we can start an authentic, from within journey.
Tanya, I keep seeing you nodding along, so I want to ask for you to expand on it. Because you work in HR departments, what is Agile HR from the inside?
Yeah. And I very much agree with it's two things. It's how do you make the right environment for Agile to be successful in the company, and it's how do you apply Agile to be a better department and to give a better experience. So sorry, I nod a lot. I agree with I know a number of these ladies and they're very smart. It comes back to mindset for me. And when I coach people in HR about Agile, it's always, they're like, oh, but we're not doing Scrum, so it doesn't apply to me. I'm like, no, let's come back to the principles. Let's come back to the mindset. This can apply to any of your work. And that's really where you get HR people hooked on the concepts, and they realize it's something that can make their work and their people environment better.
But when you reference the principles, or we talk about the Agile Manifesto, happy 20th birthday, it kind of has the same problem as tech in general and as HR in general, though HR may have a more feminine side, quote unquote, but The Agile Manifesto was made by a bunch of white dudes.
Yeah.
A very wealthy standpoint. So as we look at Agile 20 years later, how do we actually make it inclusive? How do we actually make it invite other people? But should we even be looking at those principles anymore? And this is open to anyone. Should the Agile Manifesto be our manifesto if it was made by the same old?
Well, I have to say that I love the individuals and interactions of our processes and tools, because as a HR professional and as someone who's worked in the function for a long time, it's about people over process. And when Tanya and I first designed that workshop all those years ago for our internal colleagues, we really took it back to that manifesto. And yes, it might be 20 years old, and yes, it might have been a load of white guys that were on a nice holiday on Valentine's Day or whenever it was, and there they were bashing this out. Well, yes, I like the concept of it, whilst I wouldn't necessarily say I'm going to write it in gold and put it on my wall and repeat it every day like an affirmation. I do still go back to the point that it is at the core of Agile HR is about people over process, and it's the guiding principle I think that we can all bring ourselves to.
Anybody else agree or disagree that we should be holding those principles?
I think just an additional point that there has been a lot of experimentation in the last 20 years to create other manifestos in the Agile community, and there is an Agile People manifesto as well. Maybe we can share these links in the chat in a moment. And also there are other manifestos which are more inclusive in their language. For example, there is an Agile Marketing manifesto. There is an Agile Finance manifesto. So for every specialization in a typical organization, there are communities. There is a manifesto for Agile in education. The EduScrum movement and their participants have created their version. So I think it's worth exploring these statements, because the language, making the language more inclusive, especially when we look at the principles of the software manifesto, manifesto for software development, having working software every time. What if your software in the Agile HR community is actually a well-functioning organization? The language doesn't apply. You need to take leaps to translate it. What does it mean for us in our context when we are not producing software, but maybe we are experimenting with ways of organizing and redesigning org structures dynamically. So how do we do that? In this case is, I think, the Agile People principles, for example, or the HR manifesto are better, more inclusive statements than the software manifesto.
Since you're quite familiar with them, can you, and obviously we will share in the description of the YouTube video, can you give us a little bit of what makes them more inclusive, or what's the difference?
The difference is the language. So in the software Agile, in the original 2001 manifesto for software development, we talk a lot about working software and architecture. And in the Agile People manifesto and Agile People principles, we talk about people and teams. So the language and the product of our efforts, the language is adapted to what is our product when we work in HR and when we work with people.
Okay, I wasn't sure, and I think we'll all examine them. I'm sure many of our listeners are either very well versed in Agile Manifesto or not, because probably the people listening right now are either on one side of the spectrum or the other, or both. So either they're from the human resources management side, or they're from the Agile software side. And to understand those two together, I think is, and this gets to the point of scaling tomorrow. Something we talk about, and one of the main roles that I think Lisa's the one that mentioned the word talent in there. And I guess that was probably the point when we got to that crux. But the main role, one of the main function of HR is, for a lot of companies, more recruitment than retention. Because especially in the predominantly IT industry, which honestly is every industry right now, especially when we went remote, it's pretty much everyone has to be digitally literate to work for a business when doing remote, which is its old problem of inclusion. But how can we make sure we foster a workplace that welcomes everyone, no matter where they work from, where they're working, especially in this, when we're going from remote first to maybe hybrid, which most have a lot of concerns about. And what I'm asking is the retention first, because I think it's actually, first of all, it's a logical cost saver. It's easier, just like it's like 10 times cheaper to keep a client than to get a new one. It's, I don't know the statistic, but infinitely cheaper to retain an employee than to go through the process of recruiting that employee. But also you can't solve a diversity and inclusion problem and equity, of course, without actually solving the retention problem. And at least I don't know the statistics of other industries, but the tech industry has, and again, it encompasses all industries, it is completely having a lever problem for women, and all marginalized people will go through the process of getting training in one way or another to join tech and then leave. So what can we do to change agilely, in an agile mindset, to change the recruitment process? What has to change to embrace diversity, inclusion, and equity? And someone in the chat, just to say, Matt says, I believe replacing an employee costs their annual salary. That sounds about right. And also that I think an easy thing we could say is like buffer to require transparent salaries. They saw 3 times the amount of recruitment when they published salaries, but who would like to kick off that conversation?
Well, first of all, it's been a long time since I was involved in recruitment, but I don't remember ever paying somebody's annual salary to replace them. But it was a very long time ago. And Jen, I think you're right. It's all the costs. Okay. Yeah, I have to admit it's been a very long time since I was involved in recruitment. And Jen, I honestly don't think it's strange at all to focus on retention, because you can't recruit your way out of a bad culture. And and there's no one quick fix either. So, you know, this inclusion needs to be sustainable, and it needs to be long term, and it needs to be genuinely part of a company's values, because you have it as an added separate feature and business add-on, it just doesn't work, and people see that for what it is, and you're not going to return them. And if we think about leadership, you know, Andrea made some great points earlier about leadership setting the tone. They set the tone through the purpose, the values, the behaviors, the leadership style of that organization, which then ultimately influences the culture of it as well. And again, you know, thinking about the leadership team, are they diverse? Are there role models there? Are people actually seeing, like your point earlier, Jen, you were talking about there was an all white men panel of something, but they at least acknowledged, hey, we acknowledge that we all look the same, we think the same, but we're working on it. And it's the same for other companies. They need to realize what problem they've got before they can then go about, is this the right problem to solve?
By the way, I call bullshit on them. Those, I think Andre is the one that told us like a future of work we were talking about before the conversation. And if your panel looks like that, if it's a manel, as I affectionately learned the name, you're just touting bullshit. So keep touting your bullshit, but I'm gonna look away. I've definitely written to conferences that are like, okay, you want to cover in like very much my wheelhouse topics for journalism, and it'll be like 10 white guys, 1 white woman. And my response is, I'm sorry, I'm not covering your conference. Y'all suck. And I prioritize diversity, and thankfully I have my main journalism client, the New Stack, truly values that and will retweet whatever I say about that. Lisa, I see you nodding along in your blissful exotic background over there. Please tell us more.
So it is interesting you say about retention. From what I've seen in the last year, and I think even before we have the pandemic, right, that organizations are not dealing with retention issue, because it was an issue before the pandemic. And you see, especially, I can only talk from the tech side in that as a person that's an experience, number one, that I've worked in this field, and I'm a person that has the experience of managing manager level and individual contributors, right? My level has the worst retention across the IT spectrum, in that people leave, and then you start going down into the marginalized groups within in the women level. And I think with the retention, yes, you do definitely need to focus on that. But I think what you're tending to find that because of what's happened in the past year with the pandemic and, Black Lives Matter and all that aspect, the impact has been more on, well, we're going to recruit in rather than address the issues for the mid-level individuals. So retention, I don't believe, is really at the forefront of most organizations. Having said that, I think the biggest issue that you tend to find is when you look at women that are in the mid-level, they move around a lot more than men will do, the ones that stay in the tech industry. It's very rare to see a woman progress in a role up into the leadership team. And it starts from the top right down to the bottom. I think it's much easier for entry-level individuals to be retained than it is for mid-level. And what's the problem with that? It is about transparency. Until companies accept that they're not transparent on the number of women that hold seniority in their roles, have the opportunity to maintain their own budgets, that have decision-making opportunities, retention is never going to work.
Absolutely. And the whole recruitment scheme will be a failure because you're just spending all that money and time is money. I think that's where that number comes from, Steph.
Yeah.
But it was also your salary going into recruiting those people. But it's just a fruitless point. For those joining us now live, this is Aginext 2021, and we are talking about Agile HR, Agile People, and specifically right now we're talking about recruitment and retention, and what I would like to put out there and say the many things still wrong with that. So what can be done to better support women and people of color and other marginalized groups moving up the corporate ladder instead of being shuffled around departments? What can be done systematically in a company, or maybe systematically is the wrong word?
I'll start off from the conversation with that. I think, we hear when we talk about mentorship, coaching and sponsorship, and it's really key. And I think a lot of companies fail at that for the mid-level women. We still talk about, about equity and equality, inclusion, diversity, but how many companies actually publish what's actually going on in the organizations? That's still a big issue. And until we address that, we're not going to make any changes. I think one of the things that you tend to find is that, the employee resource groups have good points and have their bad points. And those should not be seen as the way of solving the issues that a company has for marginalized groups. That could be anyone. It doesn't mean necessarily just women or people of color. It could be people with, that, have some form of disability, so forth. I think it's really clear that it's easy to sign a manifesto internally to say that you sign up to this, but do you actually practice what you preach? And I think until we have those things, being addressed to the forefront, it is working, this is a challenge that's going to continue to be at the forefront, because we're still talking about 50-50 for women in terms of diversity, and it keeps moving. I don't see it changing in my lifetime. I'm going to be honest with you. I've worked in tech for a long time, and unfortunately, it's a case of having talks like this and keep calling these things out. You know, there is no easy solution, I can be honest with you.
And if you don't release that information, it makes, well, I'm guessing a lot of them are not releasing it for a reason. They suck, being the simple way of saying it. But when we find out things like whistleblowers are playing a very valid point in companies, like Google had, as part of their recruitment strategy, in the pipeline, having historically Black colleges, universities, which for those outside of the US are Ivy Leagues in everything but name and color of students. They are exceptional. And by the way, the Vice President of the United States went to Howard. So these are exceptional schools. But they had it in the beginning of their pipeline, but they did not think that these schools were appropriate to actually hire people as part of their actual strategy. Obviously not public, made public, thank you, whistleblowers. But who need protection now, and hopefully will get soon across the world. But this is a serious problem across the board, and it becomes more serious, especially like in your field, Liza, because when we're talking about data science, when we're talking about AI, tech in general, we are all users of tech now, and yet still the same demographic are building that tech. That's a problem when tech becomes increasingly more personal. It's in our pockets, it's in our homes, it's in our cars, it's in our bodies. These are incredible things. And when tech is not diverse, when tech is not inclusive, when tech is not equitable, which leads to retention, is probably the key thing. These are all key parts to retention. Then we're building a very dangerous future that is just increasing inequity, which obviously this last year has done. Has anyone worked for a team that's actually done anything interesting or right to increase diversity, inclusion, and equity on the teams, maybe at the team level, even more than the company level? Because we are agile, we are supposed to be working more autonomously.
I mean, some of the strategies that that I've employed in the past are ensuring that areas and leaders are sharing what they've been doing. So we've very much kept it on the forefront of executive meetings so that people can challenge each other and say, well, you said you were going to do that last time, but did you actually do it? And also go into the recruitment, you know, going back to recruitment, even though I don't do it, but I'm fully aware that these conversations happen, demanding, demanding 50-50 shortlists, for example. And if the recruiter's not coming up with this, you don't use them until they have come up with them. And very, famously, a lot of our managers have actually done that. And, using diverse suppliers, starting to talk about, supply chains now, recruitment suppliers and other things, are you using diverse suppliers? Because until you're doing that, how are you then going to get the right pipeline, to get the right shortlists? And, we all really need to hold ourselves and each other accountable, and also put this in leadership objectives. What gets rewarded gets done. And, if they're not being held accountable for this or for something else, they're not going to do it.
And it's proven, like, we should all know these statistics now, but it directly affects diversity, inclusion, and equity, directly affect profits. Even Qantas Airlines, pre-pandemic, I'm not going to quote anything in the last year, but they went from bankrupt to the most successful airline, international airline, because that's all they focused on, and specifically at the C-level. Andrea, I saw your hand up. Please go.
Yes, I was also intending to take this conversation to a bit of reflection on beyond quotas. So assuming that we are acting on the numbers and increasing the opportunities for inclusion or for increasing diversity, but then the next step is really to think about and really inquire and check back of, do people actually feel included once they are in? And not even included, but this word, the new word, which is of true importance, it is, do they feel they belong? And that's where it's really more about a feeling and an emotion, and also that that I can find my group. Maybe it's not within my team, but I still feel supported. I find that my values are respected, and I find people like me with similar beliefs inside the organization. And I think this should be an organic process rather than a mandated, here is your group, join this group because you belong here. Well, by title or by the visible numbers you represent. Like I could be put into a women in tech group or into Eastern European from how I look, but maybe I would like to belong to another community. And so it should be much more organic and much more a choice of individuals. And a story of having worked on cognitive diversity, which is another aspect of how do we approach problems, and in conversations, how do we include perspectives. There was a council in the UK who works with families and supports families with loans and family support services. And we did a cognitive diversity workshop with them, effectively help them use a strengths-based approach to discover their thinking styles. And it was eye-opening. The manager of the council was with us and her team. And she found out that naturally in her team, most people were relationship-oriented in their thinking. They were less outcome-focused and much more about respect, kindness, and service. And where she wanted to take the team and the organization was through a big agile digital transformation. And she realized that her profile was more a doer, this outcome-focused. You might have used similar profiles to DISC or similar personality profiles when you discover this dynamic that actually does happen in every conversation, but until every person in the team discovers their orientation and their natural style, there will be a dominant culture. And so how do we help people discover their own thinking style, their own strengths and preferences, and then raise the awareness in every team, every room, every conversation that we will benefit from diversity only if we can welcome different people and different perspectives in the conversation.
Yeah, it's something that I prioritize with every team that I work with, actually, is a strength-based approach to either show off the diversity of the team and how they can benefit from each other, or the alternative is you find you don't have a very diverse team, no matter what they look like, because everyone has the same thinking style. And then you can see the kind of flaws inherent in that and the additional challenges you'll have because you don't have anyone who's, say, relationship oriented or outcome oriented. So it's something I use a lot with teams, and it really is a light bulb moment for a lot of teams around inclusion more broadly. So moving away from visible inclusion to actually, is this culture genuinely accepting of people who want to work differently from each other? Because you can, and I think you've said this before, Jennifer, you can have a team that looks different, but if they're all cookie cutters in the exact same kind of thought process, then actually you're not getting any benefit from diversity apart from the kind of poster element of diversity. So truly inclusive comes from a variety of style and approach, in addition to, the inclusion of people from all walks of life.
Yeah, I think both are really essential.
Absolutely. You
do
can't.
When a team realizes, because again, with marginalized individuals, we don't forget there are undisclosed things that people may or may not disclose in terms of diversity. We also have an inherent issue that maybe recruiters do or do not, and external recruitment firms encourage diversity in their pipelines. Probably not, I would assume, because recruitment tools and software is inherently racist and biased. However, then they are, I hate this term, but I don't really know another term, blinding the candidates because they don't want people to go behind their back, which I at least get that aspect of it, if that's their job and money. But how do you, if you find you are a team that has any sort of diversity issue, how do you overcome that issue? There's one thing being aware, but how is it the job of HR and maybe agile coaches or coaches in general to then help them overcome that? Because more of the same recruits more of the same. That's why internal referrals are one of the biggest ways to include. While we all love that extra cash, are the biggest way to include more of the same in an organization.
Yes, I want to just very quickly share a personal story on this. So as an Agile coach or Scrum Master, absolutely, I think we can share whatever statistics or numbers and research that proves that your team will be more innovative, more energized, more creative if there is higher diversity. It doesn't really land until people actually feel it and experience it. And for me, what has been life-changing, there were a few events, but one of the recent events was I have worked with an organization which supports BAME individuals, helps them get into tech. You might know them, Liza, Code Untapped. And it was being exposed to that diversity. And I invited some of the Scrum Masters or Agile coaches to come with me. And you are not typically surrounded with that amount of diversity in tech, which we were able to attract into that project, because it was for people who are underrepresented in tech. And it was amazing to see the boost in creativity and the friendships that emerged from that project. And once you expose yourself, or another experience where actually it was in Hsbc where we had, I think it was a blind technology consultant, usability consultant come speak with us on a conference. And he did a demo using our product. And it has been eye-opening how much creativity we get when we expose ourselves to people with different backgrounds and experience that help your team experience these things, whether it's a hackathon, whether it's joining school projects, or really going into underrepresented communities and do things together. Because when it touches your heart, then it hits you that it's just not just the right thing to do, but it's actually very creative as well.
Okay, so okay, right. So that's interesting what you say. So the first thing I'm going to say is I don't actually like the term BAME. I'm going to put it out there because I just think it just groups everyone together, but that has no real relevance for me, to be honest with you, because I know what I am. I think the other point is the fact that yes, we are there. There's a minority, but there are a lot of people that are from marginalized groups that work in tech, and it's not that we're not there. We're not visible as much as I would say our counterparts that may come from, the more predominant groups as such. It is interesting. I think what you've seen out of what's happened in the last 12 months or so with the Black Lives Matter is that people are more willing to stand up and say, we are unseen, we are here. It's not a case of we're not here, it's that people weren't being seen. It's not like I've worked in tech, as I said, for 20-something years, and I can't say I'm the only person of colour that I've ever worked alongside. It's just that you may not see a large group, but it's a factor that we know about, these things. I think it is easy, there's a lot of programs that go out there and stuff like that. And one of the reasons why I chose to be more visible was the fact that, yes, I'm here and I've worked here for 20 years, and to illustrate that there's a lot of us that have been invisible to the masses. It's not the case we're not here. We are here, and having those opportunities to show that there's different role models out there. I think one of the things that for me was that I was very much focused on tech. So from that perspective is that I've always knew, and I knew from an early age, from 10, which if you've seen any of my stuff out there on the internet, you'll know that I always wanted to work in a technical field. I did kind of go in a different journey, but it's illustrating that I went in a traditional path. And I think one of the things that I try to illustrate to individuals is that, yes, we've got an issue with individuals that come from different backgrounds and in terms of, being underrepresented. but you can get there. That's the first thing. You don't have to follow the traditional path. There's different avenues, you know, the boot camp and so forth, and changing the mindset. I think that's the biggest problem we have in recruitment and retention, is that there's women or individuals from marginalized groups that could easily move into, I'm talking from a tech perspective, move into that role and having the opportunity to see that you don't have to have, you know, that strong academic path of having a degree. I mean, I'm fortunate, I've got 2 degrees. So, but I'm not the norm, and that's not the norm talking in terms of being Black, Asian or whatever. That's the norm talking of being a woman that works in tech. So it's really important for me. I think that's my perspective, because I just wanted to point out, because that's one of the things that I've changed the direction of how I address, you know, individuals. And when I talk about this, is that it's the untapped potential versus the not being seen, because we are there, we've been here, there's been a lot of things that have been done over the years. And, you know, a classic example is, you know, the Hidden Figures film, where the 3 main individuals that were crucial to the space launch were Black women, but people didn't know. So it's more about being awareness and encourage other people to speak. And I started this journey. It wasn't an easy ride for me, but having those opportunities and embracing the fact that we're here and we're here to stay. That's what I was going to say on that matter.
Absolutely. And we just had our Women in Agile had their lightning talks, the Women in Agile London. We are a London-based in origin community, they're international. I have to also talk about one of our other meetup partners, Coding Black Females. If you are looking to hire, they just completed their first boot camp, Black Code Her, CODHER. I mean, they'll probably all have jobs already because it's a phenomenal program, but you should be looking for alternatives to recruitment, and specifically, traditional recruitment companies, traditional recruitment process, traditional recruitment software, including LinkedIn, puts out boot camps, which to me is insane because boot camps is much more modern, up to date technology you're learning than others, than a 4-year degree that typically has textbooks made 10 years ago. So that is an essential part of any recruitment process, is eliminating the access to 4-year degree. As for, if it, in a technical role, ask for code samples instead, but also don't require someone to do a bunch of work for free. If you're going through a process and you want them to prove their work, pay them for that work no matter what. So we could go on and on about this. We are past our time. I think this is such an important topic. I would just like to say specifically to white listeners, don't make diversity other people's problems. We are the problem in most points. So it is our job to educate ourselves. I personally recommend always starting with the anti-racist courses, The Basics by Kim Creighton. They're just 3 courses. I think they're $30 each. A lot of self-learning. Another thing to listen to is Seen on Radio, SCENE on Radio Season 2, Seeing White. I think we need to reckon with ourselves before we can welcome spaces. It's ridiculous that we even have to, as my friend Daniel Edmonds says, it's called Black Lives Matter. Like, what a low bar to meet. Like, they more than matter. It's just to say that, like, why is it controversial? Please don't, and in general, I think we all try to abbreviate. It's a very agile thing to do. I do think we should avoid abbreviations in general. BLM really bothers me, just like LGBTQA. It's like we're kind of, getting back to the age where we whisper Black, like the Black people or the gays. Also, don't say Blacks or gays. These are adjectives. Same with trans people. It goes on and on. We all can improve. It is an endless journey and an exhausting one, but let's take the exhausting unto ourselves, not to the people that are marginalized in our community. I have hope and faith. This conference gives me a lot of it. Community does a lot of that. Thank you to Liza, Steph, Tanya, and Andrea for joining us. Thank you to everyone watching in the audience. I don't have a lot of goals for 2021. I've kept that I'm just lowering my expectations this year. I think we all had a lot of goals for 2020. I think we need to lower expectations, but this is the one where we need to set the expectations higher, to set our goals higher, and to measure. We didn't even get into metrics. We need to do better collectively as an industry and as in our positions as coaches in human resources or people, whatever you want to call it. It's our duty to do better. So thank you everyone for joining us at Aginext 2021, and I'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place,